All right. So, if you have scanned through the handout, you may notice that the pages are double-sided today. And if you look at the schedule, you may notice that we have 4 hours today instead of 6, as we had yesterday. So, this is the part where I'm going to have to figure out what to cut and what not to cut. So, I would like to maybe start with just these points that were on the board from yesterday and see how many we can erase. I like to leave this empty by the end of the day. Maybe if there's some opportunity for people to say, last night I was thinking or we were discussing and I want to bring this up. So let's get a little opportunity for some feedback and then we'll just jump into the handouts. And I'm going to probably skim through some of these slides because we just don't have the time today for them all. So let me see. Bricks, let's see. I haven't talked about bricks yet, actually. I shouldn't start there. I know that much. Addressing systemic issues. Which question was that? Remember? Remember the question that I wrote down, addressing systemic issues? Not here yet. Oh, okay. How about pest and disease pressure? Talk about that sufficiently, though? Whose question was that? Okay. Toxic load. I made some references to the fact that it's my understanding that microbes are really quite sophisticated at digesting toxins from the environment. That's really all that I have to say. Weed pressure. I think I've talked about weed pressure. We talked about that a decent amount. Clay. We talked about clay. The water cycle, decently talked about. Maybe perhaps a little bit more we can talk about, but I think that was reasonably covered. Live roots in the soil. If anybody says, like, I want to talk more about this, now's your chance to say it, otherwise I'm going to erase it.
Well, I guess I do.
Go for it. Yes.
Live roots in the soil versus like dead roots in the soil.
Yes.
Right? I mean, dead roots in the soil through winter are like seem like
It's a lot better than nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Green is better than brown.
When I hear about like
Brown.
live roots in the soil, I begin to wonder, like, am I missing like that? I am trying that something needs to live through this winter, or just having it covered and having structure to the soil, right? I mean, with feedstock.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say they say green's better than brown, brown's better than nothing.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it's a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And the more life you can maintain throughout the 12 months of the year, the better. But depending on your dynamics, it's really a question of where is your system now and what are the next steps you can take to make it function more well. Mm-hmm. And also, what are your limiting factors? If you've got good mulch or whatever else like that going on, but other things that are issues, don't say, okay, I have to do this because this is what I'm supposed to do. It's sort of about sitting back and saying, okay, there's all these dynamics at play. What's the thing that seems to me to be the thing that's the biggest limiting factor, and address that. So go around the circle of issues and say, really, this one feels like it's the one that really is holding things back the most. And sometimes, it's like at this point of the year, I can't really do anything efficient, anything inexpensive. But 2 months from now, I can do something simple that won't cost very much. So that's how I look at it. Is where can I have the lightest touch, least expensive, most systemic effect, overall, and on a certain topic, maybe now I can't do it, but in 4 months I can. So I'm just going to make that mental note and deal with it then. And yeah, it's about addressing limiting factors. So what are the things that are holding life back from functioning, and how do we address those? So living roots is a really nice thing to have, but I wouldn't get totally attached at all points in time. Try not to get attached in general. Carbon markets, I talk about carbon markets, I think sufficiently in reference to nutrient density, I think being a much more significant economic driver than carbon credits, et cetera. Integrating ecosystem health. Whose was that? Anybody remember? You guys are still getting warmed up here. Did you all get coffee here? Yeah. Want to go out? We can do a lap around the lodge. get our blood flowing. Just jumping right in. Okay. How about I ask this question? Are there things that you came up with or discussed last night with people that you would like to bring up to me now before I jump into the agenda? Yes.
So getting back to this plant spacing.
Yeah.
So in my garden, I plant cover crops periodically, and sometimes like buckwheat and celia, which, you know, are good for pollinators and increase phosphorus plant availability. I sometimes leave that growing in my garden wherever it comes up because it
Yep.
reseeds itself.
Yep.
Should I pull those where it's close to the vegetable plant to increase production?
So, I mean, everything I was talking about with the SRI, and things like that yesterday was presuming a monoculture model, right? It's like it's only rice or it's only
Okay.
tomatoes, which is a flawed concept. So, you know, in the savanna ecosystem of an oak savanna in a prairie or whatever, you've got one tree every 100 feet or whatever it is. They're widely spaced, but there's all kinds of other plants growing in that
Okay.
ecosystem as well. So, yeah, in general, if I've got a tomato plant, I have lots of space between my tomato plants. If there's other things that pop up and show up, I say, hey, great.
Okay.
So I definitely love to have a nice oat or a wheat or a buckwheat, or sometimes they get really nice looking, right? The
Yeah.
ones that volunteer. So yeah, I would definitely let them be.
Okay.
I call that polyculture. I call it nature planting. Or
It really just comes down to the ability to harvest at that point, right?
it's about like
As long as it's
yeah.
not a nuisance.
If it's not a nuisance, if it's not it's like shading something out, and even if it is shading out, if I got a bed of salad greens and there's like a dock that's showing up, it's like a beautiful, yellow dock. Like, it's going to be shading out some salad greens, but who cares? I got plenty of salad greens. I can afford to let them some of it shaded out. So, yeah, it's a ordered jumble.
Yes.
I don't want to have just all one thing and all clean. I want to have it.
Okay.
Yeah, on the root exudates, I was at the Soil Health Academy a couple weeks ago, they were talking about that the plant doesn't put out the root exudates the whole growing season? That is there a curve as to how they're putting them out, or?
They don't put root exudates out.
Yeah,
the
they
whole
say
growing
they
season.
stop at a certain point and then they need to be putting a new planting, is what they were indicating. And I
I've never
thought-
heard that one.
I thought the root exudates were functioning as long as the plant was doing photosynthesis as well.
So, yeah, I mean, another one of these things, root exudates. So I told you yesterday that the plant makes sugar in its leaves and it injects it into the soil, which is really not true. It's really much more sophisticated than that and profound than that. Anybody heard of James White and
Yeah.
rhizophagy? Familiar with this rhizophagy thing? So this guy, I'm not sure he's Purdue or he's at some university in the East, but he's been studying the actual dynamics of what's going on with the microbes in the soil and the plants, and it's really quite cool. I mean, basically, as the plant root grows, there's microbes in the soil, and it grows basically around them and encapsulates them, and then it digests them. So it sucks off their cell walls, digests some of their protoplasm, leaves their vacuoles, like the things that are necessary for it to stay alive, and then spits them back out a different part of the root, but with a different. It can be coming out as a different microbe, right? It modulates the DNA, it puts a new cell wall on it, puts some new protoplasm in there, and it comes out something different. And so it's not like injecting sugar into the soil and the microbes are coming up and eating it, and then they're going out and doing their thing, and then it's like harvesting them somehow. It's literally like growing into the microbes and then digesting them and then spitting them out, new ones spitting out there and then growing into them. It's this, and then they're coming up the stem and they're going out the leaf. Like the microbes are not just in the soil next to the root, right? They're in the plant, they're on the leaf surface, they're in the leaf, they're in the root. It's not like the microbes end here and the root begins there. It's a much more sophisticated dynamic that's going on. So that's my understanding of what's happening, and it wouldn't make sense that it just stops at some point. Like that doesn't.
Well, in Elaine's thing too, she says the plant could tell that bacteria to go get X, Y, and Z, or to have that fungus go get X, Y, Z.
Well,
Bring it back.
and what actually James White is saying is it'll take in. I mean, I don't know my Latin names of microbes, but it'll take in one Latin name and spit out a different Latin name. It'll modulate. I mean, evolution is happening in real time. Oh God, there's so much about microbes.
Aliens.
Well, it's just that life is not this fixed thing. That evolution and modulation and transmutation and I mean, it's But 714X, who's that guy? Anybody know? 714X, is that ring a bell for anybody? No. What's his name? He was French. He was who wrote Secret Life of Plants? Bird and Tompkins.
Yeah.
They wrote a book about this guy. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he's a French guy, and looking at this microbe in this environment, like looks like that. You take this one genetic, like this one microbe, and you put it in this environment, and it shows up looking like that kind of a thing, and put it in this environment, it looks like that. It's like there's modulation that goes on based on the environment. Like the same genetic material can look like an entirely different organism. So it's not like these things are fixed, as I understand it. It's much more modulating and nuanced. And I mean, who really needs to understand it? It's kind of cool, like the concepts are totally cool, but who really needs to understand the Latin names and like all the specific practices? For me, it's like, okay, I go out to the land, I'm like, this area wants to be a pond. This area feels like it's a little bit too dry. I need to make sure I'm getting the irrigation going here better. Like, for me, it's like there's a subtle touch. Like I can see what the needs are. And then like, I actually like to hang out with my kids and go swimming and stuff like that. So I don't feel like I need to control and understand and things. But yeah, to that point about the exudates stopping, I mean, my understanding is that plants do exude more at certain times and less at other times. And when they're, if they're stressed out, for instance, if it's dry and they're filling fruit, so you got tomato plants and it's August and it hasn't rained in a while. We'll talk about the plant visual symptomology, but the bottom leaves. Ever seen the bottom leaves on a tomato plant start to turn yellow and then turn brown and just like die, right? And we're like, oh, that's a disease. No, it's not. It's the plant is not getting what it needs from the environment, and so she's sacrificing her body for her baby. She's sucking the life force out of her bottom leaves, out of the edges of her roots. She's basically harvesting, she's accessing her body to feed her baby. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. So that may be roughly what they're talking about, in that but as I understand it, that's more of a symptom of like the environmental conditions are such that there's a limiting factor. But if there was sufficient hydration, that wouldn't be happening. The plant would still be feeding the microbes. So it's, but yeah, I don't know the other reference beyond that. All right.
What I've noticed with growing is in growers generally is like there's an art to it and there's a science to it, and oftentimes people fall into one camp or the other.
Yeah.
But it's really a blend of the two. Like some of the science is helpful, so you know why. Like why are the lower leaves yellowing? That's probably nitrogen because it's mobile. They're taking it up to the top, so they're probably looking for nitrogen. How are you going to get that? So there's like the science of it, but there's also the art of it, is figuring out how to get that to them and
Yeah.
So it's the combination.
Which is the path of life, right? Is finding our balance
You don't
between our
have all
heart
the
and our mind
answers.
and staying balanced in the. We'll talk about the energy today of like engaging. So yeah, all right. So integrating ecosystem health. No one questions that integrating ecosystem health. I think yes, absolutely. In my mind, I think I remember the question. Like, here's my 2,000 acres of oats or wheat, and here's my edges that are something else. Like for me, if you can integrate, so the whole system is being managed. I think I said yesterday I like to spread my minerals from stone wall to stone wall. I'm not just doing fertility in the area where I'm producing crops. I'm trying to create a dynamic where I've got polyculture that's a living, more of a living ecosystem than here's my production area, here's my not production area.
And if you're willing to deal with, you were talking about the swales before.
Yeah.
You get the swales, plant your perennials
Yeah.
on your swales and do your wheat or oats in between that is, all of the,
All the better.
yeah.
And hedgerows.
Yeah,
we're
we're
just-
taking them out, we need to put them back.
Nature does polyculture, she doesn't do monocultures. Very few people have talked about wind. It's windy, how do you keep the mulch down? And I was just saying at breakfast, put a windbreak in. And somebody was saying, well, I might put a perennial windbreak in, but it's gonna be 20 years till it's tall enough to do any good. And what'd you say?
Sort of.
put some sorghum in, and don't mow it.
Sorghum, corn, and she said millet, all that stuff.
Anything.
6 feet tall.
Just put a row of that in, and that will be, if you can break up that high wind, you can create microclimates where things behave much more, it's much more peaceful, and it's more about
Branching sunflowers.
branching sunflowers. There's
Something
ton-
like, for every foot is 3 foot or something like that. There's a ratio of height to distance.
So, if you,
Now, you can plant kerns in that gets 10 feet tall, 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
And you'll do it in the second year, I think.
Yeah.
What's that?
Kernza?
Kernza?
I put it all in there. Put some bushes in there. Put everything in there.
Depending on your scale, depending on your dynamics, integrating these different, it doesn't like have to be, here's my half acre vegetable plot and there's my orchard, right? Like integrating the rows and having a tree here and a tree here. If you got laid to your land, if it does have curves, like where does it want to be low? Like you stop and think and feel, and I mean, it's more fun that way. It's like the environment is more pleasurable that way, in my experience. You walk around a really good farm with this guy in Connecticut who's just a brilliant farmer.
I've got an item going in the auction, it's a pint of Carrageenan seed, Siberian pea tree.
Yeah, pea tree.
Shrub.
Those guys are,
that, makes great hedgerows.
yes.
And doesn't take that long. And great food, just really good.
For all kinds of people, all kinds of birds and everybody.
For people.
People also.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
My kids love to
Yeah.
snack on it before I realized it was safe. I was like, stop eating that shit.
What are you doing?
The kids know. They know. I mean, they don't always know.
Depends on how much they grew up outside. Yeah.
They will eat it.
All right.
Outside.
So, all right. I think I've hit a few of these things. I'm sensitive to time, so I want to just jump into this handout and see where it ends up. I think pretty much the first few slides here are reviewing what it is that I'm hoping to address today. So we can skip those and start at the reducing limiting factors. That last slide on page 1 is the one that I think I used to sort of talk about, okay, now we've talked about the cover crops and we've talked about the mineral balancing and we've talked about the sort of getting these systems in place conceptually. Yesterday I said was fall and winter. Today is conceptually spring and summer. So we're starting with the spring, starting seed. So these are some topics I want to just cover here before we talk about putting things into the ground and some techniques there. So I talked about early childhood development yesterday. One thing that is possible to do, which I don't necessarily want to spend too much time on, but you can soak your seed before planting if you want to stimulate that germination process. Sometimes people have a hard time getting things to germinate. Even just a half hour in moisture, depending on what the seed is, will cause it to fill up with moisture and make it more likely to germinate. You can potentially mix, whatever it is. I use the example of salad greens in a hoop house in February or early March, right? Where I come from, it may get above freezing for a couple days in February or March. And if I've got, brassicas that I had Mizuna or something like that was growing in the fall that I was picking. Any of those brassicas that you plant before the winter solstice will basically start going to seed after the winter solstice. I'm not sure if everybody's noticed this, but your pak choi, your katsoi, your mizuna, your arugula, things like that. If you plant them in the fall, as soon as the winter solstice happens, they start to go to seed. So if you want to be growing crops in that hoop house in the winter and getting that sort of jump on the season, oftentimes I'll pull those guys out and I'll try to start lettuce or start somebody else in that really quite cold and less than opportune environment. And so if I'm watching the weather and I see, okay, we're gonna have 3 days above freezing, and I want to try to get some lettuce to germinate in that, it's really quite cold, but I'm still gonna try to get it established. I'll soak the seed before planting. So that will speed up the process. You can add a little bit of kelp or a little bit of sea salt in that water to give it a little more extra juice or bump. But that's a potentially technique you can use.
You ever use a little bit of H2O2 in that water?
I do not use H2O2. I've heard many people talk about it, but yes, I do not. Hydrogen peroxide, yes. Okay, so inoculant we talked about yesterday, getting that inoculant on your seed. Potting soils, getting the minerals and the microbes in the potting soil. I talked about that as well yesterday. Temperature of soil and air. This is an important point, I think. Oftentimes people will try to do exactly what I'm discussing, just talked about, which is try to push the season, try to get things to get them established early, try to beat the season. I'm not sure if anybody else has this experience, but I want to be the first one at the farmer's market with zucchini, or the first one at the farmer's market with tomatoes, or whatever. I want to try to push the edges of the season. If anybody has looked at a seed catalog, I think Johnny's oftentimes does this. I'll say, germination percent by soil temperature. Everybody seen that chart?
Mhm.
So at 50 degrees, you'll get 60% germination. At 60 degrees soil temperature, you'll get 80% germination. At 70 degrees, you'll get 90% germination. At 80 degrees, you'll get 80% germination. So it goes up, it peaks, and it goes back down again. 70 degrees is the optimal soil temperature for germination of this crop. Some people put mats in their hoop houses or in their starting houses to maintain a certain temperature. If you look at buildings in a city, they've got thermostats. Oftentimes, if it's hot out, they'll be set to 70 for the air conditioning, and if it's cold out, they'll be set to 70 for the heater. So if you notice, 70 seems to be a temperature that A, the seeds germinate at well, and B, the humans function at well. Interestingly, microbes also like 70 degrees. So if you're trying to put plants into cold soil to get a start on the season, understand that the microbes aren't functioning well, right? Just because the ground is workable doesn't mean that there's a high level of biological activity in it. And so this is why I think we were talking yesterday about the tomatoes that germinate 2 weeks after you put the seedlings in and then take off and run, is they wait until the environmental conditions are appropriate before they germinate and start growing. We put them in whenever we feel like it or whenever we think we've been told to, but there's a really important piece here, which is that the ambient temperature of the soil actually directly connects to the level of vitality or activity of the microbes. And so I'm not trying to say don't put things in early. What I'm saying is if you're going to put things in early, create a dynamic where that soil is warmed up so that the biology is active. So if that means using a hoop house or something like that, great. But just understand the critical role of soil temperature in overall biological activity, not just the plant, but the microbes as well. So important nuance. I've had the experience over and over and over and over and over again as a kid. We get our broccoli seedlings and our kale seedlings and our cabbage seedlings, and we try to put them in early because we want to get a jump on the season, and they sit there, and then the flea beetles come and eat them all up. Anybody had that experience?
Yeah.
Because you wanted to get a jump on the season? The reason they didn't grow was because the soil was cold. And so just because you put them into the ground doesn't mean they're going to grow. Access to water, we talked about. Spacing and SRI, we talked about. Root and top balance, we did not talk about. So I think I referenced it. That shape of a tree that's in a field that didn't have any competition? You actually don't have oak trees and maple trees around here.
No, we don't.
Yeah. Conceptually,
And sometimes a cottonwood tree.
a cottonwood will get that
Or poplars.
whatever it is. There's some pine trees they have different shape, but a nice deciduous tree in the middle of a field. You got that archetypal concept of this just broad, arching, round structure.
We like those pictures.
You like those pictures. If you look at a cucumber plant, it's hard to look at a pepper plant. A pepper plant can have that broad structure, or it can be leggy. It can be skinny. A lot of our plants, I'll use an oak tree as an example. Where I live, we've got oak trees that sort of grow wild in the woods. And if there's an area where a bunch of oaks germinated 40 years ago that were relatively close to each other, they all go straight up. They have pretty much no branches. There's there's branches right on top, but they're just in competition with each other functionally. And you find fewer acorns in that part of the woods. You may have 10 oak trees, but very few acorns, versus another spot where you've got an oak tree that had space and it's got broad arching branches and is covered with acorns on the ground. If you think about seedlings, if you ever started seedlings in a tray, and they maybe will have that round structure for a little bit, but then they start to go vertical. They get go leggy, we call it. I think I had the picture of the onion seedling in this little cell tray yesterday. There's this thing that happens with they're called basically growth hormones. I think they're what is it? I can't remember the name of growth hormones, but basically the growing root tip makes growth hormones, and the growing leaf tip makes growth hormones, and if they're able to balance themselves, you'll get this like as above so below, this broad arching structure above ground and a broad arching structure below ground, and you want to have that balance. If the plant experiences a boundary, it can't reach out further, then that hormonal balance starts to be no longer balanced. It becomes imbalanced. And that's when you get the leggy structure, the tight, like the vertical. It doesn't have that broadness to it. So this is, as we talked about with the SRI yesterday, I said, put your seedlings in at 2 weeks. 12, 14 days is the age at which they haven't reached those boundaries. If you want to put in a tomato seedling that's 4 weeks old or 6 weeks old, what you have to do is you have to have a bigger amount of space. So, go for it. However big the top is, you should have a bottom that's equally large or larger. We really want to keep the bottom of the plant as big as or bigger than the top. This is probably the only good reason for pruning, in my perspective, is when you start to see those plants get leggy. One thing is, why are they getting leggy? Is there a limitation in space for some reason? Maybe the soil got dry and the roots aren't able to get fed. So maybe you're being fed by one small amount of the root area or the plant area. Pruning back the plant at that point, because a tomato plant will start to get leggy, right? It'll just start to go vertical. It doesn't have that branching structure. That's when you set in these hormone imbalances that over time end up causing the plant to die. Yeah.
So I use soil blocking.
Yeah, perfect. So this is soil blocks is a perfect opportunity here. I said, when you plant your seeds, look for the ones that germinate first. Those are the ones you want to give more space and put out into the field. If you start with soil blocks that are quite small, as soon as they germinate, the ones that germinate first, block them up. Chuck the rest, and then block them up again. So if you want to do that, that's great. But that would be the way to do it, is to make the root ball space bigger and bigger. The longer you keep it in, before you put it into the ground, the bigger that root ball needs to be. And you don't want the roots to reach an edge. It's as soon as the roots reach an edge is when they stop, is when they begin to define downward, like what their potential is to produce this year. I think John Kemp talks about the third leaf and the fifth leaf and the seventh leaf or something like that on corn. It's like on day 8, the corn plant determines how many ears it's going to have. On day 15, it determines how many rows are going to be on each ear. On day 21, it determines how many kernels are going to be on each row. By the time that corn plant is 3 weeks old, it's read the environment, it figures out what's going on, and it's determined, like, it could have produced 8 ears that each, had 1,000 kernels on them, and it said, actually, I'm going to do 2 ears that each have 500 kernels on them, based on my environmental conditions. So it says, it knows its inherent genetic potential, and then it reads the environment and it determines early on in life what it's going to be. And so these limitations that we put in through things like that root, restriction, effectively is what determines your yield potential at the end of the year. So, are those all points that sort of make sense? Yeah. You guys are certainly not quite
These slides aren't numbered. Right?
energetic as you were yesterday. The slides are not numbered?
Right.
Well, we're still working on the last slide on page 1. I'm walking slowly through that one. I skipped the first 5. Yesterday, we didn't look at slides at all for the first 2 hours, so you don't really need to look at the slides. This is just sort of, if you'd like. Trying to figure out how to get a little more energy in the room. It's more fun when there's like,
We're holding on to your every word, that's why.
is that what it is? Or it was like,
You're bringing up existential crisis again, just
Yeah.
get into that topic and everyone's gonna get fired up.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Yes,
That's what
so
it is.
this practical shit, like, you know,
Yeah.
let's just get rid of the practical stuff, go meta. The purpose of this course is not actually to discuss agronomy. That's just that's a facade for the deeper questions of life. Hey, bring me your questions. I'm happy to go lots of different places. Well, we are about to step into intention and consciousness, so we'll see if that stimulates anything. All right, so this last slide I have here, last word on this slide, on the last slide of page 1 is intention. And this is where I'd like to sort of maybe spend a couple of minutes. I'm of the opinion that I think I said it yesterday, the farmer's shadow is the best fertilizer. I think is one of those sort of old sayings. I'm not sure if anybody's raised children, but maybe you've had a dog. If you get up in the morning and you've got a certain attitude, you got a baby, it'll start crying, right? You get another attitude and that baby will be all cuddly and friendly. You got a certain attitude and that dog is going to be pissy, right? You say dogs and children, they can they can read a character. It's about the tone that you hold as you engage the process. So I've got a story here, but then we'll want to open it up a little bit. I was a few years ago, our local organic farming organization had a mentorship program, and farmers could sign up and say, I want this person to be my mentor, and they had some money and everybody got taken care of logistically, whatever it was. There was a local farmer who had taken this course and was like, Dan, I want you to be my mentor. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what that means, but sure. Effectively, it didn't mean much. She could give me a call when she wanted to, but she didn't. But I was supposed to go and walk the farm. And so I finally did go, I'm not sure what it was, end of July, beginning of August. And I was going from one place to another, and she was like, hey, come stop by, check things out. And she had about 1 acre of mixed vegetables. And I was coming and I was like, wow, things looked really good. Like things were mulched, there was drip tape, they'd been inoculated, they had space, they were growing beautifully. I'm like, I don't know many people who would not want to trade their garden for yours, right? Like this is looking, you're doing a really good job, but I don't really need to say much. But she's like, no, keep walking through. I'm like, I'm gonna walk through with these. Yeah, tomatoes look brilliant. The potatoes are great. Cucumbers doing really good. And I came down to the onion patch and I was like, okay, wait a minute here. What did you do with the onions? Because I'd never seen perfect onions. Anybody ever grown onions?
Yeah.
Like every single onion was perfect. Just like amazing. Like I've never grown perfect onions. I've never seen perfect onions. What did you do? She's like, nothing different. I'm like, I don't know. Everything else looks really nice, but these onions are looking really good. She's like, oh, no, nothing. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. So we kept walking down the field. Got down to the winter squash, and she's like, I think I remember what it was. It was February, and we were all getting spring fever and wanting to get our hands in the dirt, and it was cold out, and like, okay, we can plant the onions, and the crew was ready to plant onions, and they're getting ready, and just before they started planting, they stopped for a second, and just had a moment, and said thank you. I was like, oh, well, that explains it. I knew you did something. I think I've said this yesterday, I think of plants as alive, just like animals are alive. I think of them as conscious, sentient beings. Like I think of animals as conscious, sentient beings. People talk about, it's animal abuse to eat chickens or to slaughter a pig or whatever. I'm like, in my way of thinking about it, you choose your incarnation. There's like a soul that incarnates in a body, and if you're going to be born to a sow on a farm, you got a pretty good idea of what your end game is, right? Like ahead of time, before incarnating, this is how I see it. You know where you're going, right? You're ending up in the slaughterhouse, and so the question is really just about what's the quality of your life. And so I want my pigs to be as happy as possible for as long as possible. And I think of it the same way about onions and broccoli. Like they know they're choosing to be an onion, that they're going to be eaten, and they actually are honored by the opportunity to be eaten and to become part of us, right? This is a choice that plant has chosen this incarnation and wants to do what it's doing. So like the best thing I can do is say thank you. The best thing I can do is like understand that you are a being just like I'm a being, and I can feel in relation to that. So with a baby who can't talk, you hold the right vibe and you engage in that feeling, and there's just a wonderful, profound experience that happens with a baby. Anybody ever held a baby? Like it's this amazing vibrational. You just have them there. It's like whoa, 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 whoa. You're like, okay, what else is there in life? Like this is pleasure, right? So for me, going out to the field, the first thing you want to do is say, hey guys, how's it going? I mean, don't say it out loud. There's lots of people who, well, if you want to, go for it. Some people have this whole ceremonial process. Okay, we're going to go out and we're going to acknowledge the nature spirits. And we've got this and we're going to do this. Like that smells like religion to me, right? That smells like dogma and religiosity and stuck in your head. So the point for me is not to like act it out. The point is to feel it. So for me, like I go into a hoop house full of greens in the morning. You open the door like a big, 25 by 100 foot hoop house, right? I planted them a week ago, and the sun's just rising. There's mist, and you open the door, and it's like, poof. Anybody ever felt that? Just like, hey, how's it going? It's a great morning, right? You hear them? You feel them? You ever felt that? Like that this blast?
Yeah.
It's not wind, but it sure feels like something just hit you. That love, that energy, that like vitality. So for me, that's the point, is to engage your plants that way. This is the X factor. This is the thing that, like, it doesn't matter if there's moisture in the soil. It doesn't matter if you've inoculated, right? All the rest of this physical plane stuff is much less important than that energy, that consciousness, that intention of it all. So, I told you a couple of the rules I've got, like, not written down. I don't like enforce them, like thou shalt not kill insects. It's just why kill an insect? If there's a potato plant that's getting attacked by Colorado potato beetles, it's 1 out of 100, and that's the one that's weak, and they're taking it out. Fine. And there's late blight taking out a tomato plant. Great. I got a whole hoop house full of tomato plants. Who cares if one of them's weak and late blight's taking it out? It's not going to kill the rest of them, so let it be. Don't worry about it. So one of the rules is, if you got a bad attitude, you're not welcome in my field. Right? There are no raised voices. There's no anger. There's no fighting allowed in the garden. This is, I'm going to say sacred space, but that vibe is not welcome here, right? If you do not have the right attitude, we'll find something else for you to do. You can go chop some wood. You can do other things. But when it comes to working with plants, if you are not in that mode, in that zone, then I don't want you in my garden. My mother has lots of people come through her farm and help out and volunteer, and you'll see, they were transplanting brassicas, they were putting in broccoli and cabbage, and you can see every fourth bed has a third of the seedlings died, right? Like, which person was on which beds transplanting, and which person had what attitude, and they all kind of put it in the same way, but damn it, if the person that had the bad attitude, half their seedlings died. Right? Anybody have this experience?
Yeah.
So they call it the green thumb, the black thumb, right? It's not that you're a bad person. It's just that you don't know how to hold a certain kind of vibe. And so this is really, 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 really important in my world. This is a very big piece of the puzzle. We can get all stuck in the technique. How much cobalt do you have? How much molybdenum do you have? What the soil penetrometer says I've got 85 psi. Well, I really want 45 psi. All things in moderation. Don't take it too seriously. but I take very seriously the attitude. And so from the point of planting, of germination, just imagine you're dealing with, someone you love. Imagine you care and they care. Like, do you ever have that, like with certain people, you've got a relationship where when you're around them, like you just feel better because they're open and you're open and it just feels good to be in relationship with each other? Like, that's part of what makes farming gratifying. That's what part of what makes, is you're dealing with life. And if you engage life that way, it gets really pleasurable, right? It's actually very much fun. So I don't care what you call it. You don't need to call it anything. I don't think you need to go about any ceremony. It doesn't have to be anything that anybody around you is necessarily aware of. But when you go out to the field in the morning and you're like, what am I doing today? It's not about, okay, well, I got to weed and then I got to pick and then I got to do this. It's like, hey guys, how you doing? What's up? Anything?
Yeah.
It is not verbal, right? It does not have to be verbal. You can if you want to, but for me, it actually makes it more difficult if you try to go about the words process. I like to say, we used to have very successful sports teams in Massachusetts. And I do not have a TV, so and I don't really follow the sports, but if your team's in the playoffs or they're having the Super Bowl or the whatever it is, like, might as well see the game. So for me, I have to go to the bar to see the game, and so my concept is if I'm sitting down to watch Super Bowl and making small talk with somebody, and I said, I was just talking to the divas of the tomatoes this morning, and they were telling me that they're thirsty. I might get kicked out of the bar, but if I said I had a gut feeling today, that'd be totally normal, right? So kinesthetics, consciousness, sentience. There's all kinds of language out there. There's all kinds of language and words that people use, and some people are uncomfortable with some words and they're more comfortable with other words. The gut feeling is a thing people are pretty much comfortable with. Actually get down into it, and the gut is an antenna. And the heart also is an antenna, right? So we know things in our heart. We say that, I felt it in my heart, I knew it in my heart. Like from a vibrational perspective, the neurons in your heart are an antenna tuning into the vibrations from the field. And, that's how nature communicates, through vibration, it seems like. So we have the lexicon in our vernacular of, I tuned into the vibration of the field, that we say it in shorthand, I had a gut feeling. So whatever feels comfortable for you as far as like a way of saying it, cognizing it, etc. All I want to say is I think this is a very, really important piece of the puzzle. And when you're dealing with living beings, in the whole process, as much as you can remember that or feel it, in my experience, the success of the overall system is much more to the degree you're doing that. So that's what I want to start the topic of intention by saying. So that being said, I'm going to move to the planting details. We want to talk about some more like logistical, scientific things. So when you're going about putting plants in the ground, or maybe I can stop and say, does anybody want to say anything about what I just talked about before I just move along? Yes.
I talk constantly when I'm in the garden to the plants, the weeds.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing what you're trying to do, yes. And then when I see something that's really going gangbusters, I say, hey, look at you, good for you, I celebrated them.
Yeah. So you're at that stage in life where you're just got it flowing through you properly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dan, I have a question. I'm just trying to picture, so yes, like going out in the morning and like saying, hey, like what's going on, everybody? Fine. But obviously you've got these days where like you've got to be at the market and you've got to have, so like, I guess I'm finding a little bit of like, well, where's that moment where you're like, I do know I have to have those onions ready for the market tomorrow. It's not like you're just going out every morning and going like, what's today gonna bring? I mean, because you've got a schedule as a farmer to make So I guess what's that middle ground?
Well, if your farmer's market's Saturday morning at 9 and it's a half-hour drive and you got the, whatever the table and the tent and all that kind of stuff, like you could get up really, really early on Saturday morning and rush around to get everything picked and washed and boxed and loaded up, or you could say, a bunch of things I can pick on Friday afternoon. And, whatever, you got kids, you got schedule, you got meals, you got things like that. So, seeing what the future, you know the pattern, you know the cycle of the future. I don't like rushing around. I don't like being stressed. I've spent lots of time in my life farming, pushing, hard, rush, and you can do it. You get in sort of a groove, and you're just like busting it out, and that sort of feels good. But I propose the puttering principle, which is that if I've got enough space to putter around freely, everything will get done proactively, brilliantly. Remember that Family Circus, that comic strip used to have Family Circus? And you see the path of the kid, and you just go all over, and it'd be up, and it'd be down, and around, and like that's if you track me on my farm, that's what it looks like. I'm going over here. I got to plug in the irrigation. I'm gonna go pick that up, and I'm fixing this pipe over here, and I got to throw some seed in here, and oh, that's right, I got to put the drench down over here, and like I'm all over the place. And I'm usually doing 5 things. I got this over here, and I'm doing that, and I'm actually heading to there, but through here.
And that's not stress. Can you please
No.
call my husband and explain that to him?
No.
He cannot handle the fact that I'm multitasking all the time. And I'm like, no, I'm getting it all done.
It's all getting taken care of.
In farming lately, there's this idea though that you can train yourself to not do that. Like you can be lean and efficient and like limit your steps through the farm and streamline the processes. And in doing that, I think you miss some of that connection of puttering.
It's just more fun.
You've just created more space to do more, but not necessarily like accomplish what your intention.
I think with if you're doing a polyculture model, right, the most productive land is one that is managed sensitively at a human scale. Like, so, 2 acres is a lot of land.
Right.
Like you can make a living on 2 acres. We were talking about this last night about, people living in the city, people being out in the countryside. I'm like, in my vision, people have a hectare or 2 for a family. And there's a bunch of us all living all over the place, and we all know each other, and we're operating on this human scale, and we've got relationships, we've got community, we've doing, singing at night and playing sports, and like, we don't have to have 500 acres or 1,000 acres. I mean, we shouldn't, I don't think. I think that is like the mechanistic, reductionist, model, the colonized model is that like, quote unquote efficiency. Like for what purpose? So, yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you. What's
Third
up?
point, one of the things we changed with what you're talking about is the cup of coffee, the cup of tea, or the kombucha in the morning. Just get in a good spot, positive, whatever. Try not to go, oh my God, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. Just kind of give thanks for that cup, and then.
And if you've got
tone for the day.
And if you've got things in your life that are stressing you out, figure out what those are, and figure out what the causal dynamics are, and try to solve those things systemically, right? Like identify the whole purpose of life is to live, right? And to enjoy the process, and better to figure that out when you're 30 than when you're 80, right? I mean, you get 50 years of pleasure as opposed to 50 years of stress. Like at some point, you're gonna get to the point where you realize, like, why am I doing all this? What's the point in the first place? And maybe it actually is to enjoy life. And so, yes, there are stresses, there are families, there are relationships, there are all these other things that are like underlying dynamics. So getting into a point where you can be proactive and addressing them foundationally, yeah. So.
I think, to me, the point with the puttering, it's a slowing down and it's a listening. And what I've noticed is if I'm doing that I'm in a more relaxed state, even if I'm finished gardening and I'm inside, it's like, oh my gosh, did I turn the water off, in this area? And then I'll just follow that inspiration, and on my way there, something really important that was left out shouldn't be there. Or I have the irrigation from the Livingston ditch coming into my pond, and the pond's ready to overflow, and I totally forgot. It's like, there's always these little bits of inspiration, and it takes care of everything before the night is over. It's just amazing. I'm grateful. I'm really grateful for that.
And that's how, they said in other cultures that were more sophisticated than ours that they could talk to plants and talk to animals, right? There was communication. So if you go through the process in the morning of saying, hey, what's up? How's it going? You're not necessarily going to hear the tomato plant saying, actually, we'd like to be pruned today, or, boy, it sure would be nice to be mulched. It's getting kind of dry out here. You might not hear them saying that to you directly. Some people do, and those people are really cool people. And if you're not one of those people, you should find someone who is and befriend them, because it can be really helpful to answer your questions about what's going on in your land if you got somebody who can talk directly and get that feedback loop going. But for some of us,
I'm fascinated in trying to figure out how you find that person. Like, hey,
Yeah.
I put my mind last night. Like,
how do I do
What
that?
do you say? Like, hey, are you talking to a plant?
Yeah.
Like,
Smell tells
like
you so
a
much.
insert
What's
of
that?
ad?
Yeah.
Or-
Like when I walk through, that's what I go off of. It's like, oh, everything smells happy and healthy. Like, and then other times you walk in and say, something doesn't smell quite right. And that, I've noticed that so many times.
Some are kinesthetic, some are clairaudience, some are clairsentient. We've all got our strengths and our weaknesses. We've all got like a thing that we're inherently better at. If you go for like, so this is one of the benefits of having like a local chapter, is if you're doing farm walks, every month you have a potluck and you walk through the field, like just pay attention to how people engage. Oftentimes people who are that way have learned to hide it. Some of them actually think they're crazy, which is so sad, right? Those wise, sensitive people actually have this totally negative story in their mind, but it doesn't matter. They can't help it. They hear the plants. And so, they're not paying attention to the speaker talking, this is what we did. We mulched here. And they're sort of off in the corner and they're sort of like looking around and, I don't know. It's, but the broader point is, what I wanted to say is sometimes like if I'm hoeing or I'm mulching or I'm doing some kind of repetitive act, like I'll get this groove going, and there'll be like a little lyric from a song that'll pop into my head, and I'll be going along, I'll bop, and I'll be like just repeating this lyric, not thinking about it. It's like a little. But if I actually look at that lyric, if I look at those 5 words, it's somehow really, really relevant to like what they need. Or I'll be meditating on like some podcast I heard 3 months ago, like which will come to mind randomly about this topic, about nitrogen.
Randomly.
Randomly, which is not right. It's all vibration and frequency and antenna, and so these things that just pop into our mind are not just popping into our mind. They're like when you're open, like those are they. Yes, to your point. Oh, I should check the water. Well, no, I turned it off. No, it's not about checking the water. It's about I should just go that direction and see what happens. Yeah, and I'll be shown this, I'll be shown that. So the more you follow it, like as I understand it, the more you like just let yourself be moved by those things, the more you're receptive and just like you move in the flow of it, the more engagement you get. They're like, oh my God, did you see that? She listened. Oh my God, a human, listen. And they're like all going back and forth with each other. I think we got a live one here. I'm gonna try next, right? Imagine these plants that are all there, that are all conscious, that are all sentient, that are all in communication, that are all like in like love with nature and light and moon and stars, and they're like, who the hell are these humans that are walking through? They're totally oblivious, right? From their perspective, we're just like not understandable. They've written us off. They've given up on us because they know what reality is, and we're just so tuned out. So for them to have a human that's like even a little bit receptive, like you're gonna have all kinds of nature, spirit, love coming at you to support you in that process. So that's really what it comes down to, is just, I think if you can be in that place, being open to it and letting it pull you and drive you, I think there's some people in this room who might say they talk to their plants. If you want to raise your hand or not, raise your hand.
We all
Other
talk
people.
to our plants.
We're all talking.
I'm seeing smiles, I'm seeing knowing looks, well, clairvoyant. I think I've seen some whisperers in this room. I think I'm seeing some people who's.
Maybe realizing we have been, but we felt like we were the crazy people, so
Yeah.
turn that one off.
That low self-esteem shit is like, needs to just get going. Yeah. Yes.
So herbalists really try to develop that sense, so
Yeah.
look for an herbalist.
But you can be an herbalist who's totally in your head and try, and trying is the last thing. Relaxing into it is the thing.
Right, relax, go find a
Yeah.
sit spot, sit by a plant.
But
Listen.
that would be a community to plug into. Yes.
Yeah, I find it, in those moments,
Yeah.
and I get that, maybe he's listening now. Now, the next step is what do I do with it? And it's one thing to hear this communication or experience, and then it's another
To follow through.
follow through, and
Yeah.
then it's like, whoa, he really paid attention to me.
That's how you build the trust.
Yeah.
That's how you build the trust. Imagine it's a love relationship.
Yeah.
Imagine it's a love relationship and someone you deeply care about has their subtle ways of communicating with you, and they aren't necessarily totally straightforward, or it's not in a way that you see it, but you can learn the pattern, and then that deepens. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, going back to this puttering thing.
Yeah.
How do you match that with the like intense pressure that these farms have to be commercially viable? And like I was working on a farm, vegetables yesterday for a little bit, and I think the main farmer totally subscribes to this idea, and that's why she got into farming in the first place. But at the end of the day, she had this like intense pressure to
Yeah. To make a
to
living.
make that amount of revenue, and labor is her biggest cost, and every minute is cost to her, and she has a mortgage, and she's all that, so how do you?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Because people who are coming to work on a farm are like $12 an hour. Like, I really can't make a living doing that. And you have, sensitivity to that. I mean, the whole structure of culture right now is perverse. And figuring out how to disconnect from it as much as possible, I think, is a foundational piece. Like minimizing your costs, like minimizing the amount of money you spend on things gives you the space to not need as much money and to have, to be able to settle into that. So a lot of farmers are, taught that they need to buy the tractor, they need to get a bunch of lands, they need to have the debt, they need to, buy the black plastic, they need to, have the fertilizer and have the crew. So they're starting off with like major negative economic dynamic. Like they're in debt to start off. And so that's certainly one of the things that I, with my years of experience, didn't do was spend any money. I don't buy anything new, pretty much. Craigslist, like used tractor, used, everything is used. Hoop houses are used. I buy greenhouse plastic. I guess I buy new greenhouse plastic. I buy, 2-cycle engines. So like a weed whacker or a chainsaw, I buy those new. But pretty much nothing else is new. I don't buy new things. And I only spend money when I got it. I don't ever go into debt. I don't use a credit card. So if I don't have money, I don't spend it. And I mean, I think that's one piece is just sort of is stepping back and sort of and having it be a gentle process of building up your system.
I can kind of talk to what she's saying.
It's a hard issue though, with like if you've got a bunch of crew and you want to pay them well and you have to make a bunch of money. I mean, I had this, so what I did is I built a cabin and I said to somebody who wants to be spend a year living on my farm and experience the whole life process. And I'll pay you $400 a week. And you get your room covered, you get your food covered, and you get a profound learning experience. And so, I mean, that kind of a dynamic, I think, is one where I had minimal stress. He was putting aside money, ended up the season with 10 grand cash in his pocket, a ton of experience. And yeah, I mean, so go for it.
So what you're point is, it's not that she's not doing that. And a lot of the market gardeners are trained to, when you have help come on, the whole point when they show up is set the tone. Set the speed, set the tone, set everything to maximize that. So it's not that, because we do the same thing, but it's not, we still have these moments, maybe when you're not, they're not there, or in the morning, or whatever. But when the labor shows up, and I do it with my kids too, they'll sit down and they're picking peas, and then they'll move over here and they'll pick it. It's like, you have to be with them to set that harvest tone, the speed and the tone, so that when they're moving to get those things off, mainly to meet the heat. But it's not that, maybe she's not, but we still have those moments. But when it comes to labor, you have to set the tone or the speed, or they'll just drive you up distance.
And how I mean, I grew up on a farm where we raised 40 crops. CSA, farmers market, managing 40 crops is a pain in the butt. And for your home use is one thing. I'm a homesteader, and damn it, I'm not going to buy anything from a store, so I'm going to grow everything for myself. Fine, no problem. But what do you actually make money on? Like, what is the thing that you make money on, or the 2 or 3 things you make money on that you can efficiently do? So we would, have salad greens. Like, if we're delivery to Boston on Friday, Thursday's picking day, and everybody knows Thursday's picking day, and you start picking, and I'm out there with my little tote and my scissors, and I'm picking, and people are hanging out at the kitchen table sorting, and we throw them in the washer and the spinner, and by 2 o'clock we made $1,000. There's $1,000 in greens sitting in the cooler, and that's it's not stressful. It's like, this is picking day, and then okay, I've got another order. We got to pick 20 bunches of chard, and we got to pick the squashes coming in and things like that. So if you get into that proactive space, you can get into the flow, but you have to be really practical about what makes the money, and get that money covered so you don't stress out about it. What are the actual expenses? What are the actual income? And then you can have more time for the other things. And like, okay, well, I planted too much. The weeds, took over. Okay, fine, mow it. Don't worry about it. So yeah, I think there's lessons in there. There's points in there. Hope that's something for you. Yes.
Well, I don't have a question. I just want to say how much I appreciate this perspective, because it's really antithetical to the daily grind that is like superimposed from childhood, job, everything. And as nutritionists, we deal with people on the end result of the exact stressors that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then try and help. But until things change from a cultural perspective, there's not a whole lot. And that mindset of puttering, of intention, of gratitude is really antithetical to our culture, but I feel like it's endogenous to our
nature.
selves
Yeah.
and on natural systems. And I just really appreciate this conversation, because I think especially in this industry, that's why a lot of us choose to be in this industry, and it's a lot of our culture interferes with our ability to really tap into what it is we're doing. So, and this isn't talked about. Usually it's, how far apart are you putting your tomatoes, and what exact percentage of boron did you say I needed? And so to talk about these concepts, I think is really, really important and unique, and I really appreciate it.
Or from the human health side, to be like, oh, just meditate. I mean, just, spend 15 minutes a day meditating, and then go back into this system that completely depletes and
No,
drains
it's all
every-
one system.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta deal with the stressors in your life systemically. And-
Over
yeah.
the course of your existence, not just a focused
Right.
15 minutes a day, but how do I do my day so that I keep my stress like in this range versus
Yeah.
up here all the time.
Or my pleasure.
Yeah.
It's not about minimizing stress, it's about maximizing pleasure.
Pleasure, yeah.
We're not fighting the bad, we're building the good.
If you give us
Yeah.
one
And it's
do-over,
not an industry, it's a community.
it would be not to have the mortgage. We could have done without the mortgage, the way you described that you live. Didn't see it when we got started, didn't understand it, and if I had one do-over, we'd have a shanty,
Damn
no
straight.
mortgage, I could work half as much.
Yeah.
That's where I personally think I went wrong, but it is what it is.
I found, just my personal story, I was like, okay, we got 2 kids now, like, we're renting. I've got one job managing this farm, and I got my parents' land, and we're like put some hoop houses up, and we're growing tomatoes there for selling for market to save money. And I made, I'm not sure what it was, $10,000 in heirloom tomatoes in, a season off a couple loop houses selling. I had a contract with Whole Foods, and I was like, they're like, we'll take all the heirloom tomatoes you've got, and at $3.50 a pound. I'm like, okay, let's select your own tomatoes. Dumped a whole bunch of minerals onto those hoop houses, like jacked them up. They were producing like crazy. But this was 2008, and remember the crash of 2008?
Yeah.
And there was this old rundown wreck of a place, right? The barn was a tear down. The house was condemned. It was like 1880 old farmhouse, and it'd been on the market for a while, and lots of people came and looked at it. It had land. It was like, oh, it's this place, but it's like, oh, no one's gonna want to fix that place up. And so, yeah, it was December of 2008, and it was a wreck. It was a wreck, but the roof line was straight. It had a post and beam barn that was 3 stories, big L. Like the rooms were all there. Sure, there was broken windows. Sure, there was holes in the walls. Sure, there was, the floor was rotted out of the bathroom. But you can fix that. The electrical was 60, 70 years old. Like, okay, but it's got a house and it's got a barn, and it was really cheap, right? It was $125,000 for 15 acres and a house and a barn.
Wow.
And like in Massachusetts, an hour from Harvard Square. And I'm like, game, set, match. I'm set for life. I've got land, I've got a house, I've got a barn, there's water that runs through it. Who cares that it's only got an acre of arable land? Like, who needs more than that?
And a creek too.
Yeah, seasonal stream runs through it. It's gorgeous.
It's only in New England.
What's that?
It's only in New England.
There's no, come on, how about,
Eastern Montana.
there's so many places across the, there's so many places everywhere, nooks, yeah.
Not Montana right now.
Not Montana. Yeah, we've been overrun by money.
I've heard about it.
I mean,
This lady's saying we got plenty of, she's like, I know spots.
I mean, we got lucky, but I don't believe it was luck. I mean, I believe we set the intention 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We ended up buying our neighbor's property for half of what they could sell it for.
Yeah.
We didn't have a straight roof line. We got we've done 2 years of just straight cleanup on the land, but
Yeah.
it's there. I just feel like it goes back to the conversation you just had. Like, we set the intention 20 years ago, and we've got water rights. We're on the river. I mean, that's quote unheard of. But after we purchased it, my husband said to me, I knew we were going to end up buying this land and building a farm. And I said, that's funny, so did I.
Yeah.
And we had never talked about it. We had never, ever. It was just there. So take that for what it's worth. Yes, property values have gone up and such.
They're going back down again.
Yeah.
We got a big collapse coming. We got a nice exciting collapse coming. It's great. Bring it on. Bring on a good collapse, because that's when that's exactly when you buy. Come on, guys. Look at the patterns of life. At some point, you get to see like things are going up, then they go back down again. Then they go up, then they go back down again. Save your money, minimize your expenses, focus your mind.
Yep.
Right? You got how many decades? This is what was a big realization for me when I was 25 years old, and I've been. Every 3 months or 4 months, I was doing something different. Going here, doing that. I was in a big rush. Kind of do all this stuff. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm 25. We'll say I got 75 years ahead of me. We'll call it 50. I don't care. Like, just take a breath. Play for the long game. Like, identify the things that are not working. Stop them. Identify the things you want. Start building towards them. Get positioned. Get ready. And, if it takes 5 years, if it takes 3 years, you're 25. Okay, 28 is still, you got 72 years out of you or whatever it is. Just that sort of context for me was like it was a very empowering realization. Like, stop pushing for the right now. Think about what the deeper patterns are. Think about what the deeper dynamics are. Look at your life, be humble, be honest, be self-critical of like what is not working and start solving that. But don't spend money for starters. Like, how much money do you spend that you really don't need to spend? How much is actually counterproductive? I talk about this as far as food, and people that are all worried about the climate and worried about, and judging other people and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, is the money, like, did you spend any money on food that was part of the industrial system? recently? Because if you did, you are part of the problem. Every single dollar you put into the system is you being part of the problem, right? Which apps did you download? Which things did you purchase? Like, think about it. You are putting energy into the problem if you engage in these things. Like, you can say, oh, well, the world's going to pot and all those bad people. That whole thing about there's so many those people, other people who don't know. Anybody, like, please do never say that to me. Like, think about your life, think about your actions, take responsibility for your actions. And like, if we do that, we're set, we win. And if we don't do it, we're hypocrites, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to, is really taking responsibility for your energy. So, all right. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. We are definitely not gonna hit all the slides, but that's fine. What's the time, just for a
9:13.
9:15. So I was going to aim for 10 o'clock for a break. I do want to hit some of these points here because they're relevant from an agronomic perspective. I do sense that the energy is more in the meta than the than the detail, but I do think there's important detail points as well here. So cover crop to crop process. This is a lot of stuff is review. I just said, so address mineral deficiencies based on soil test results and recommendations. Ideally, you've identified in the fall what the things are that your soil would like to have, it doesn't have. Like, okay, there's no boron or not enough boron. I would be putting all these things down in the fall, right? I do not put, these minerals are not fertilizer. Fertilizer is like soluble nutrients that's used in real time to cause the plants to grow big. Amendments are things that systemically address underlying imbalances. In many cases are not plant available. They need to be digested by the microbiome before the plant can use them. And so for me, I talk about this as the growing cycle, the growing season. People talk about the spring being the beginning of the growing season and the fall being the end of the growing season. In my mind, there's not a beginning and an end, it's a circle. And so if you want to think about the fall as the end of one growing season, think about it also as the beginning of next year's growing season. So you want to be making sure that, in the fall, the things that are going to be needed in the spring are present. That life has time to work them in, digest them, prepare them. Like, we want to be working that. So ideally, what I say here, address mineral deficiencies based on soil test results and recommendations. I would suggest that is best done in the fall. And just get it out there is my general strategy. Don't get all uptight about measuring and like timing and, oh, it's gonna frost next week. Maybe I should wait. No. If you know the soil needs it, just get it out there. Don't worry about it. Like, perfection is never gonna happen. Don't wait for perfection. Just do the things that you don't need to be done, right? Just follow through with the things that need to be done, and life will be really exciting. Yeah.
If you're planting certain plots year round, I know you have to rest after a couple of years or so, but is there any type of amendment that you would just do naturally for like an immediate following of planting?
Yeah, so I would say that the point about you need to rest is, I think, implies that the growing of food somehow wears the land out, which is a totally wrong thought.
Okay.
Right? That actually the healthy plants build soil, and the soil gets stronger and stronger and stronger. I heard somebody say heavy feeder yesterday. The concept is that like corn pulls a lot out of the soil, or broccoli pulls a lot out of the soil. If you're operating from a fertilizer paradigm, maybe, but if your broccoli is healthy, it's building soil. The corn is building soil, right? So this concept of like taking and wearing out is true if you're engaging in that agriculture of tillage and monocultures and fertilizers and things like that. That's what we call agriculture, like the agriculture that has denuded the Middle East, that has worn out lands, that has caused lands to be desertified. Sure, true statement. But look at the other model of the indigenous communities globally that have engaged thoughtfully and built land, right? And built land and built vitality more and more and more year after year. Did I talk about the Aborigines in Australia yesterday? Did I talk about that minor point? I think it's the Great Estate is the book. But apparently the Great Estate. Apparently when the Europeans first came, they were unable to ride their horses across Australia because the organic matter was at 10 or 12%, and the land was too spongy. They couldn't ride their horses. So imagine that. 10 to 12% across the entire continent.
Wow, of Australia.
Australia,
Wow.
this land that is deeply desertified now, when the Europeans first came, had been managed by humans for 60,000 years. We're not talking through 2 or 5 or 10. Like we say agriculture is 10,000 years old, right? That's the Western myth. Like Western culture, we're the ones the only culture that really matters, right? Like everything else we don't know about because it doesn't really matter. Like agriculture is 10,000 years old. Well, the archaeological record says that the Aborigines in Australia have been actively engaging the landscape in a proactive fashion for 60,000 years. And when the Europeans came, at the end of that 60,000 year period, they hadn't worn out the land. They didn't have heavy feeders that the land needed to rest. They had 10 to 12% organic matter across the whole continent, right? North America, when the Europeans first came, they were blown away. They were blown away by how many animals and fish and berries, and they're like, this place is ridiculous. And by the way, the humans that were here were a head taller than the humans that came, right? When the Europeans came over, they were 5'2", 5'4", 5'6", and the Native Americans were 6'2", 6'4", 6'6", right? Look at the original historical record. If you read the actual, like what was written down by the people that were there, not what's been processed into your 4th grade history book, but the actual original historical record, which is still there, this is what the reality was. So
What's the book that just came out? I have it. It's written by, I think an anthropologist and an archaeologist. One of them died.
That David Graeber.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Sorry, but it's the rewriting of ancient history, basically.
Yeah.
You know, talking about how the intelligence and I mean, it's not just about their ability to manage land, but about their ability to live together and their philosophies and like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very sophisticated.
I personally went through college, I thought my father told me I had to go to college, and I was like, well, I hate school, but I didn't have the will, the independence, the capacity to say, no, I'm not going to go to college. So I did go to college, and I was like, I read the whole book, and I was like, there was one course called Human Nature. I'm like, oh, human nature. I've been hearing about human nature, and no one's ever properly explained what human nature is. It's like, finally, I'm in college, a class on what human nature is. Like, God, I've been waiting to figure this thing out. And it was Lucy and the Early Hominids, Anthropology 101. Like, no, it wasn't human nature. It was like anthropology. So whatever, I took organic chemistry, I took evolutionary biology and 20th century physics and sociology and philosophy and, explored all these things, always looking for like, why should I do anything? Like, what's the purpose of life? And didn't find it anywhere. And so ended up like out in the Himalayas, and damn, they've got a pretty sophisticated analysis of reality. We've got a science of the physical plane, right? Physics and right. You know what? Anybody know in physics what percentage of reality we can find? No. Like dark matter and dark energy are what percent of the universe? Anybody? 90, 96? Between dark energy and dark matter, like it's north of 95% of reality, according to the physicists, are called dark energy and dark matter. And what they mean by dark is we can't find it. We can't see it with any of our instruments, our telescopes, our microscopes, all of our externalized physical plane, Western scientific modes of understanding things, all of them can see 4% of reality, which means 96% of reality is on some octave that these externalized instruments can't find. That's physics, right? And I say there's metaphysics. There's the other octaves, and we have other cultural traditions that have many more centuries of written language that explain a scientific process of cause and effect. Do this, get this result. Do this, get this result. That said, your tool your scientific tool for discernment is this thing that you have incarnated into, right? The physical body that you are inhabiting is your tool of perception. And you've got 5 physical senses, but you've got all kinds of other senses also. We talked about this gut feeling, right? We talked about this heart knowing in my heart. We talked about the boof when the baby greens are like so excited in the morning time. Like, which of your 5 physical senses was the one that hit you? Hey, how's it going? Like, was it touch? Was it smell? Was it sight? Like, it wasn't one of those. It was something that hit you, but it hit you inside. It hit this web, this like thing we've got that we feel with and we know with. Like, the science of the East explains this. The science of the East tells us how to, develop those faculties, to utilize those instruments. And so, yes, I think there are the other cultural perspectives beyond the Western cultural perspective have an amazing amount for us to learn from. And so that's what got me going, was like, oh, love is the purpose. To feel love. That's why I should do anything, right? Not to get money, not to be famous, not to have power, to feel love. Like, that's the answer. And when you get the answer, like, oh, okay, well, then I'm going to feel more love. I'm going to organize all my actions around feeling more love and be happy and be fulfilled. And there's just all kinds of ways of focusing on that and the science to it. But, okay, I am digressing. So, address these deficiencies proactively, because it's a whole cycle. It's a living cycle. There was a talk about boron yesterday, and the specific talks about like toxicity and things like that. So if there's anything you're worried about, we talked about water that had too much salt in it. If there's anything you're worried about, being out of balance, buffering it with a carbon source. I talked about humates yesterday. There's biochar. It's just balancing that you can easily do. Yes.
So we've talked about those in the amendment sense.
Yeah.
I guess I keep coming back to like, and what is the fertilizer system? Like where I kind of end up is I shouldn't need one anymore, right? Like.
So that's what I'm going to try to get into is like.
Oh, okay,
that's why I'm trying to get back to the agenda. No, because I want to say this is what I do,
okay.
and this is why I do it.
Okay.
And yes.
I didn't mean that.
So we can talk philosophy for the rest of the morning and be done, and hopefully people have said they had a good time, but there are some practical things in here.
Yeah.
There are like 85 slides, so there's a couple points that are worth conveying. And so so apply fertilizer. I've got that as the next bullet point, apply fertilizer. See that one? Yeah. So for me, fertilizer is a concept. We put something down to cause the plants to grow. I'm going to give you my recipe for what I use that is, technically it's a fertilizer because it's probably like 131 or something like that, or 0.2, 1.5, 0.3. Like as far as numbers are concerned, you probably could get some numbers on it, but it's not a fertilizer. It's a biological stimulant. I like to think of the fact that I may be producing $20, $40, $60,000 of food on an acre, and there is some amount of nutrients that are coming off the land in that process that are going out. And so what are the things that are coming out in that year, and can I proactively put them back in to keep the tank full? And so my recipe for what I call fertilizer includes the following ingredients: rock phosphate, gypsum, green sand, humates, I use carbonatite, but you can say lime or something like that. There's a little bit of kelp. There's some sea salt. There's some alfalfa meal. There's a little bit of compost. I think I'm missing a couple ingredients here. And there's some sulfur. Let's just do this. 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100. 50, 50, 50, 150. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Can you English the top word?
Sulpomag,
Yeah.
SUL-PO-MAG is a product.
Okay.
I think langbonite is the what it's called if you were a geologist. I think it's actually a product name. There's another word for Sulpomag. Anybody know what it is? I mean, it's if you look it up, you can find it. But I'm missing one thing here.
Epsom salt is how I do magnesium and sulfur, but it doesn't have the Po part of it.
Yeah, sulfur, potassium, magnesium.
Sea salt?
It's right here.
Is that a 30 before they have?
50. So there's one more which I can't think of right now. I'll remember it. But these are all pounds per acre. So 100 pounds per acre, 100 pounds per acre, 100 pounds per acre. And these are 50. So kelp, sea salt, alfalfa meal, and then the compost is 150. So
Worm castings?
I don't add worm castings because I've got them in the soil.
What's the last 100?
Carbonatite or lime.
Okay.
Carbonatite is a wonderful, amazing rock mineral that comes. These are mostly rocks. Is the basic point here. But carbonatite comes out of Ontario. It's like a paramagnetic, bioavailable 10% trace element limestone. It's got 20% calcium by weight. It's 10% trace elements. It's paramagnetic, which is totally cool, and it's also got a little bit of rock phosphate and a little bit of green sand in it. But it's like a very bioavailable calcium source with tons of trace elements. But if you can't get your hands on that, limestone.
So if you're dealing with, I don't know, your part of the country, your pH is low.
Yes.
Yours is high.
Right. So this is a goodie bag. This is not a thou shalt. This is a goodie bag. And so if there's anything that you think is you don't want, then don't put it in.
But
Right.
there's nothing in there that wouldn't jive with the alkaline clay soil, is there? Maybe the lime?
Well, you told me that you got lots of calcium, but poor calcium availability.
Right.
So you've got gypsum right here, which is available calcium, and the carbonatite is quite available for them. Yeah, if you regular lime probably would not be beneficial for you here. This is just like I want to get back into the soil a full spectrum of all the goodies that are potentially going to be taken out, and I want to have a dynamic where any seed that goes into here, into this mix, is going to just have an immediate access of a full spectrum of things. Basically, nothing here is soluble. I mean, I guess the sea salt is soluble, but it's just like a finely ground, nice broad spectrum mix of all the kinds of things that life would need to function. And so, I mean, my experience is, this is the step between that shallow till and the broadcasting of the salad greens or the broadcasting of the carrots is the broadcasting of this. And 1,000 pounds per acre, if you're on a vegetable operation, it's not actually that much volume. So I think I have a guy in Pennsylvania that puts this recipe together. It costs us $400 a ton or something like that. It's not particularly expensive. And so call it cheating. Call it my thank you to the soil for what I'm taking out of it. It makes me feel good to put this down. I don't do it all the time. I don't do it necessarily in any given year in a spot. If I feel like it, I do. If I don't feel like it, I don't. But this, to me, is like the kind of thing that I want to be, like how I would engage the fertilizer conversation. If I'm going to be putting something down, these are the kind of things, and each of them has a reason and a benefit. So, yeah.
So I think one of my, when I get my soil tested every year, and then I've got 4 years of these great reports, and then but I've never done anything because I look at it and go, what? Well, I'm supposed to do all of this, and how do I apply? So I've addressed some of those things now, and I feel like I'm in the position where I'm ready to be able to yeah, I can do that. And maybe this is a question to the rest of the group, but sourcing these things is incredibly complicated to me, and I don't know if I'm coming from a place of not understanding where I'm supposed to source it from.
No, it's wicked hard.
Does anybody have a resource for sourcing? You said, a guy that mixes it for you. Does Montana?
So
have
who
a
is
guy
me?
like that?
Who is me in this case?
Yeah.
Me in this case is BFA. And local chapters have access to a mineral depot, which, we can ship it out in 50-pound bags by the ton. So there's a whole structure logistically.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
So if you buy the garden kit, who was it that was telling me they bought the garden kit this morning at breakfast? No, somebody from Eastern Montana. I don't see her here. No? Right there, she's looking at her phone, not paying attention to me. It's okay. You bought the garden kit, the spring blend?
I was looking up green sand.
Yes.
Yeah, I bought the garden kit and
Right.
had really great results.
So this is it.
That's what's in that.
That's the dry
Ziploc
blend.
bag.
Yeah, Ziploc bag is this.
Source all of these.
Yeah. So what we've been trying to do as an organization is like empower people and say, it's a real pain in the butt. And we don't want to make any money off you, but logistics, like how do you get access to this stuff? But the whole local chapter thing is about, can you find 5 people or 10 people or 20 people in your bioregion who all say, yes, I would like something like this, and go in on a collective order? Right there behind you, she said that she would be interested in potentially being a local chapter.
Yeah,
coordinator?
well, I
Yeah.
have found a distributor for like some of our feed amendments.
Yeah.
And it's Be Right or something, and so that's where I was kind of curious, like, if anyone's already that step ahead, like, do
If
you
you've got-
have an amendment resource
Yes.
in Montana?
We
Like,
used
look at you.
Plant Natural used to carry a lot of this, and reasonably priced in 50-pound bags or thereabout.
In Billings.
No one knows me, but they're out of business.
Oh, there is a place in Billings that carries like soil supplies and potting harvest, yeah.
The local chapters, in our experience, you get people who take this course and say, this sounds like it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
And we're coming up against these like very practical, physical, plain logistical issues.
right.
And so some local chapters will have somebody's barn or their garage where they just like have got stuff brought in, they've collectively ordered it, and there it is. Some people will work with a local agway or a local farm supply store and say, hey, if you sourced this, we would buy it from you. Or that person who works at a local garden supply store is part of the chapter, and they're like, hey, I can make some money doing this kind of cool thing. Like, get your hands on cobalt sulfate. Anybody? Sodium molybdate? Boric acid? Where's your manganese sulfate? I mean, manganese probably you can find, but like a lot of these trace elements, it's actually a pain in the butt to get your hands on them.
Yes.
So, yeah. That's part of why
I ordered online from that.
part of what the purpose of local chapters is for, is to facilitate this.
I
Is what I
found a
wanna say.
resource yesterday, I don't know how viable it is, I just emailed it to my husband, it's called Rock Dust Local. 'Cause-
Yes, I got a whole story about that one.
Oh, is that a bad one?
Well,
Or
The
not?
rock dust
Okay,
that comes,
that is
there's a
wrong
pile.
word. Is that not a good resource? I
he
literally just
charges many dollars per ton.
I assumed so, but at least maybe there's a lead on your system. Like where, if we can figure out where they're getting it locally.
6 core.
I'm on the record here, so, but
Okay, so
Um,
that's just, that's, sorry for that.
no, we can.
Do any of those have boron in them?
Well, the carbonatite has boron, the green sand has boron, the sea salt has boron, the kelp has boron, but none of them have it in significant quantity. So this is not I took a soil test and I'm balancing my imbalances.
It's not the amendment.
This is not your balancing the soil based on a soil test. This is your fertilizer.
This
For
is
me.
like a healthy diet versus vitamins.
Yeah. Once you've addressed your boron deficiencies and your cobalt deficiencies, for me, this is my thank you for all the amazing vitality. I'm gonna keep your topped off, and in a physical, in a dry
So
material.
if I'm gonna add boron, I'm gonna get some borax.
Yes, and get that out this fall. Yeah, I do this before regular planting.
So, uniquely, part of our property is a former gravel pit,
Yes.
and we've backfilled it to
Mhm.
try and reclaim it as not part of planting, but as part of the ecosystem.
Mhm.
So I don't know what minerals were essentially taken or exist in it. Would you say that the best way to potentially restore it, well, so I guess I have 2 questions. Number 1, to try and restore it back to the ecosystem, I thought, was to inoculate it with the surrounding dirt.
The gravel pit you're talking about that
Yeah,
you
we
backfilled into.
Yeah, we backfilled it, and above it is just natural landscape, so pine and fir and,
Yeah.
whatever. So our initial thought was to inoculate it with surrounding soil to try
Yeah.
and restore it. I'm assuming that hopefully, based on what you're saying here, at least have some of that and we'll feed it. Do we have the ability to be able to use some of what's in that former gravel pit in our actual pasture? Or because it's not in like dust form, is it not in the right form to be able to distribute it in our pasture?
The smaller the particle size, the better, basically. So if you got a little piece of gravel, it's, it takes a little while for that to become bioavailable. It mostly depends on what the parent material is. If it's a granite or if it's a basalt or if it's a sandstone or if it's I just don't know what your parent material is.
Yeah,
So,
we don't either.
yeah, that would be the thing to understand.
Right.
I mean, and you can ask me, you can go study, or you can just take some and you can spread it out a little bit and see what happens, which is usually the most important answer anyways. Like even if somebody tells you, yes, you should do it, and you do it and it doesn't work, then the answer is it didn't work. So,
Dan, you said this is like what you put right before you plant
yes,
versus what you would do in the fall.
exactly. What we talked about yesterday was fall. Like, take your
Today
soil
is-
test, yeah, this is spring. So we are not gonna hit this full book here. But like I said before, this is recorded in other places and freely available online. So I'm just gonna be present with the flow we're in, and when noon comes, noon has come. So, so prepare the bed, make the hole, test conductivity. I do wanna talk about conductivity, electrical conductivity. I don't have a conductivity meter with me because when I put them on a plane, I get them taken away because they got a sharp point on it. But anybody know what an electrical conductivity meter is? You guys know what people are familiar? Okay, it's literally about this size. It's got a little point on it. It's about that big. It's got a little screen on it, and it tests ion flow basically in the soil. And so the metaphor I like to use for this one is how many calories of food do you have to eat per day? There's this concept that an adult needs 2,000 calories, that a pregnant woman maybe needs 3,000 calories, that a growing child, a small, like a 5-year-old, maybe needs 800 calories. Whatever it is, like you need a certain amount of nutrients per day. And a conductivity meter is a way to assess in real time, like it doesn't tell you exactly what the nutrients are, but it tells you like there's a level of energy flow or energy availability, ions basically, in the soil dynamic. And so one of the things that happens in the spring when the soil's cold, the microbes aren't functioning very well, is there's not much nutrient availability. And you can see that by putting the conductivity meter into the soil and seeing there's 30 or something. So one of the things that salt fertilizers do, NPK fertilizer, which are soluble, is they add that energy availability, that nutrient availability. So things will grow, right, when you put those fertilizers down because there's nutrients that are available. We don't want our plants to be eating, soluble nutrients. We want them to be eating complex compounds from the digestion of microbiology. But the reality is that if you have low conductivity in your soil, your plants are gonna grow slowly, or not grow at all. So we talked about putting the broccoli in early; it just sits there. If you took a conductivity meter and you stuck it in the ground, you can predict it. Put that conductivity meter in the ground, it's 30. Okay, well, things are not going to grow very fast. And so this is a wonderful proactive mode of assessment. One of those things I never learned about when I was a kid on the farm was like the concept that you had to plants, sometimes they were hungry, sometimes they needed things. Like when the soil dries out, when the microbes stop functioning, you can see the conductivity reading drop. And then you can see the disease show up a week and a half, 2 weeks later. So this is a proactive mode of assessment of like what is going to be my growth dynamics, in the near future. And so monitoring conductivity is going to be one of these things I recommend. Yes, 1 second. Yes. Like I have this concept of, I'm not sure what it's like out here, but where I live, the center of every town is a church or two churches. And 200 years ago, everybody went to church on Sunday morning, and that's what you did. You took your time off for the week, and you communed with the divine, and just had that moment like, okay, we're breaking the pattern of work to have our time with God. I say, I don't care if it's Sunday morning or if it's Tuesday morning or Friday afternoon. Take an hour a week and go around the farm, the garden, and check in with each of your plants and it's each, like, how's the tomatoes doing? How you doing? Like, set aside an hour to actually stop and look and talk and communicate and pay attention, look at the growth habits. There's a bunch of things in here about growth habits and leaf shape and things like that. But one of the things you can do if you're like struggling with, you've been trained in the Western world with your mind and numbers and you're trying to tap into your intuition, is you can use this meter and you can stick it in the ground and get a reading and you can write it down. And the next week you can check and you can get a reading and you can write it down. And this is one of those things that if you do it for a growing season, every week you just do it and you see, okay, we're at 50, we're at 150, we're at 300, we're at 150. And you can monitor that, and you can see the number, and then you can begin to pay attention to the growth habit, and you can see when the diseases and the color changes happen in the leaves. It's a wonderful proactive method of like training your eye and training your sensitive, dynamics with a empirical number meter thing. So yes, you had a question or
Do you
comment.
try to match the depth of your reading to roots in particular plants or just a general?
I'll stick it here in the middle of the bed, I'll stick it there on the outside of the bed, I'll stick it in 1 inch and then 2 inches and 4 inches. And you can see, okay, the things in the middle of the bed are a little bit yellow, and in the middle of the bed the conductivity is low. The things on the edge of the bed are green, the conductivity is high. That means there's nutrient deficiencies in the middle of the bed. You can do it at 4 inches and 6 inches. So this thing, like wherever you move it, this probe, it'll give you a reading at that point. So it's not like you just get one reading. It's like, oh, let me try this. Interesting. Over here. Right? It's just like you can begin to pattern, like you can see the growth habit. Anybody ever seen that with like a bed? I think of salad greens because I do salad greens, but like the edge of the bed will be vigorously growing, but the middle of the bed is they're yellowing. Or like a winter squash patch. Like if you got lawn around the edges, I don't know if you have lawn around the edges of winter squash, but like you'll see the middle of the patch will start to get yellow and they'll die off, but on the edge they're still growing. Anybody ever notice that? Like the field is not uniform. Like, okay, out here in the edges, they had access to nutrients that were in the lawn didn't need. In the middle, they're all pulling heavily and the conductivity is dropping. So you could have seen in the middle of the field that the conductivity was low and the plants were going to start turning yellow.
It's the other way around. for
What's
us. It's the other way around for us at the edges. They're not growing.
Whatever it is, you can monitor that and you can see it. You can see how the plants grow, and so the conductivity meter can tell you, we need more something here. So when the numbers go down, you're like, okay, what's going on? Is it too dry? Are the plants growing too fast? I need to put something through the irrigation line to feed the plants with. So anyway, conductivity meter is a very powerful tool that doesn't cost too much, and you can use it.
How much?
I think it's about 100 and 150, something like that. Yeah.
So Dan, is there a range that you should be shooting for, or are you just looking at trends?
That was exactly what I was about to get. First, I wanted to inspire you that this is something that's worth paying attention to.
Okay.
And then I'll tell you, inspired. Whoa! I can predict that plants are going to turn yellow in 2 weeks by looking at the conductivity meter now. What? And I can actually do something about it by like, okay, conductivity is dropping. Then I can go in and I can apply a drench. I can water some goodies into the soil, or I can irrigate, or just the number went down.
What's happening below the surface?
Yeah.
You know, there's very few ways you can
Yeah.
test compaction.
Yeah.
And you can test moisture.
Right.
But beyond that, it is so hard to
Energy
know.
availability, nutrient availability. Like it's just one number. It's not totally perfect, but it can be a way for you to focus your mind and look. Okay, something over here needs to be addressed. So yeah. So to the practical point of what the numbers are, different meters are calibrated in different ways. So I think it's called millisiemens and microsiemens. So it depends on which one you've got, which meter you purchase, which way it's calibrated. But I think it's, what is it? It's 0.3 or 30 would be the same number. So 0.5 would be 50. So I'm going to use these ones, whichever one is millisiemens or microsiemens. I'm not sure. But when you got the one that's this one, not the point ones, but the tens one, I want to see 150 as a baseline. And I want it to go up. So I still don't remember what the other ingredient is in this recipe. I'm sorry. It'll come to me. it's written down in various places, but, so I wanna see the conductivity, I wanna see it go up and peak like that through the growing season. So when the plants are small, they don't actually need a bunch. But if this hash, every hash is a weekly assessment, I wanna see the conductivity going up, and here's when the plants are throwing fruit, right? The pregnant mother needs more food per day than the 5-year-old. So the conductivity reading of the transplant when it goes in doesn't need to be as high as the conductivity reading when the tomato plant's, filling out its fruit. So we'll call this 150, and we'll call this 350 to 850. And that's a big range, and that has everything to do with the percent organic matter. So the higher your organic matter, so like a 10% organic matter, a conductivity reading of 350 is awesome. Awesome, kicking. Because the organic matter is buffering the nutrients, right? It's not flowing like right now. It's like it's held, it's ready. So, but you got plenty flowing through. If you're at a 1% organic matter, then maybe your 850 is your target, which is very hard to get without adding fertilizer. So the higher your organic matter, the lower your conductivity reading needs to be, the more power it's got, the more torque basically your soil has, which is always the case. We always want to have more organic matter in our soil. It just solves the problems of too much clay, it solves the problem of too much sand, it solves the problem of not enough water, it solves the problem of too much water. The organic matter is the thing that basically is like a great stand-in for overall system function. But this is generally what you want to be seeing. And I can't speak to it if you've got when we're talking about the saline drip, like if you've got a salt layer on your surface of your soil, then your conductivity is probably going to be 2,000. Which means your roots are being fried, right? So it's too much charge is going to be a stress to the plants. In which case, the thing you need to be adding is liquid humates to buffer that, right? So this meter reading can give you some ballpark of what's good and what's bad, but in general, like between here and here is the range you're looking at. In many cases, if you're at 250. If you're peaking at 250 and you've got a 5% organic matter, your plants are going to be doing things that you've never seen them do before, right? It's going to be ridiculous how vigorous they are, how productive, how much they're just doing. This is a range. Really, it has to do with like, get out there and get some experience and try it out and monitor and modulate and see. I have a couple examples here. We had this thing called late blight that came through a few years ago. We had a spring that was cloudy and rainy and cloudy and rainy and cold and cloudy and rainy and cloudy and rainy and cold. It just did not warm up. There was no sun. It was raining. And so functionally what was going on was there was no sugar being manufactured in the leaves, or not very much, because there wasn't much sunlight. And the rain was leaching out the nutrients, into the subsoil. And so functionally, the conductivity was, instead of going this direction, it was going this direction. And by the time the plants got to their, puberty stage, right? Think about puberty as like the stage. If kindergarten is when you get transplanted into the garden, that's your 5-year-old getting transplanted into the garden. Puberty is when you have your first flower, right? This is now a reproductively viable plant. It wasn't when it got transplanted, now it is. So think about puberty, think about a woman, she's 13, 14 years old, and she's had sex and she's pregnant, right? You got a 1.5 foot, 2 foot tall tomato plant with a fruit on it. That is not a fully built woman's body, but that is a pregnant woman, right? So her nutritional needs are extremely high. If we want her to have a healthy life and a healthy adult body and a healthy child, she needs to be getting everything optimally, right? It's not that you can't do it, but that doing it well is the objective. And so we had this situation where it was through the season, people had put their tomato plants in, it kept raining, it kept being cloudy, the conductivity is going down. So what do you have? You have a pregnant 14-year-old with no food, right? What's the trajectory you can envision of what's going to happen to that woman? something bad's gonna happen. So we had this thing called late blight that came in, and we blamed it on the big box retailers, like they brought it up, but whatever. Everybody got late blight. Everybody was like, late blight came, it took out the tomatoes, it took out the potatoes, it took out the eggplants. Anybody in the solanaceous family was dead, which was great business for anybody who had soil conductivity, because you could sell everything at whatever price you wanted. But people were like running scared and like, what's going on? What are we gonna do? I'm like, get your conductivity meter out. I bet your conductivity is low. How do you address that? Well, if you were a human and you had too much fluid running through your system, you had low electrolytes, that'd be called like giardia, right? Which kills maybe 500,000 humans a year, right? There's some number of hundreds of thousands of humans who die from a bad case of diarrhea every year. And somebody got, I think, a Nobel, I'm not sure if it was a Nobel Peace Prize or what, for coming up with the thing that could keep humans alive. And it was a 10-cent packet of salt and sugar. And so salt and sugar, that means molasses or brown sugar or white sugar and sea salt. So what I told people was, take a gallon of molasses and 5 pounds of sea salt, dissolve it in water, and put it into your field per acre. And that will bring the conductivity up, which will maintain nutrient availability, which will help your plants stay fed through this period of extreme environmental condition. So if you understand what's causing the nutrient levels to be down, the conductivity to be down, conceptually, you got a meter, you're saying, okay, conductivity is going down. It could be soil's drying out. Like there's no moisture in the soil. So in that case, you don't need salt and sugar, you need water. So you have to have some amount of common sense. But if you've got the conductivity meter and you can see environmental imbalance, then you can logic through potentially a systemic solution, which is basically free. Right? A gallon of molasses and 5 pounds of sea salt per acre is not a big cost. And if you're going to be netting tens of thousands of dollars in tomatoes, it's a really good expense.
Can
Yeah,
you say the ratio again? Gallon and per acre?
I said a gallon of molasses and 5 pounds of sea salt. But what you do is you do it and you see what the number is. And if it's not high enough, you do some more. Or don't do it on the whole acre, do it on one bed.
Test, yeah.
Experiment. Yeah.
I'm no grower, and I'm definitely a simpleton here in terms of how I think about this. I just want to capture this and underscore it if I'm thinking about this right. Humate is basically like the bus stop or the bank account that will hold on to nutrients and make them available for kind of irrespective of the conditions, make them available to the plant.
Yeah, when
they
is it?
need it.
Organic matter in the soil is the
Yeah.
thing, but humates is something you can add that will do that. Yes. And then we could add some liquid humates in the sea salt and molasses recipe as well. Right? It's always good to put liquid humates in anything you're putting on that's soluble. I think I had that on the slide on the previous page.
So-
Yes.
So just what you're talking about, I was thinking about this on the drive up here, is this hay bale mulching thing is really, I don't know, here, or there's pockets of it around the state that's kind of come on. It's
Yeah.
just put hay bales down, flatten it, pull a hay bale apart, and plant into it. And it doesn't really work. It does, but it doesn't. But then where you live, or from Minnesota, there's a slimy mess usually in your neck of the woods that's between something you flip over and the ground. And hay bale doesn't have that, because like you put drip down and then you mulch.
Yeah.
You're creating that slimy layer almost.
It's not usually slimy, but it certainly
Yeah,
is.
yeah, it's just more moist than.
Yeah, you got moisture and, yeah. I'm not sure, is there a point there or a question?
Yeah, go on.
He's working through something over there. Yes.
Are you correlating then the conductivity with bricks?
We'll talk about bricks in a little bit. So there's two things that you have in your back pocket when you go out for your weekly communion with the divine, right? If you're going to be using meters, you got a conductivity meter in this pocket and a refractometer in that pocket, and you're monitoring conductivity in the soil and you're monitoring bricks in the leaf. Good thing you bring this up because it's like at page 12 and we're probably not going to get to it. But yes, and so I would say take your bricks reading, great, but it doesn't, like, if you don't have the conductivity meter reading first, the bricks reading is going to give you less context. So, like, if you don't have good conductivity in the soil, it's hard to get a good bricks reading. So don't bother with the refractometer. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do, but like, keeping the conductivity good in the soil is going to be foundational for overall system function, which is foundational for that high Brix reading. So a Brix reading is like, how healthy is this plant right now? And for those who don't know about refractometers, 12 is your target. Like if you have a leaf Brix of 12, you can sit back, take a nap, go on a weekend vacation. Like you will not have pest pressure, you will not have disease pressure, and your plants will be growing in a way that is absolutely stupefying. You would want to be on the farm just to be enjoying the amazing vitality of it. Like who cares who wants to go on a vacation when the farm's so beautiful, right?
Can you maintain that 12? Like the conductivity is this
Mm-hmm.
changing
Yeah.
through the season.
Yeah.
I know Brix can change.
Yep.
But
So
can you maintain 12 like from get-go? Like if you're testing, a seedling
mm-hmm.
to mature, are you looking,
Pretty
I mean,
much.
you can maintain that, you're not like, that plant isn't like, you're not trying to step it up through its lifespan, you're trying
If
to
you
start
if you start with a seed that had 3 generations of unhealthy mothers,
Yeah,
and you're putting it into sterile media, I'm going to guarantee you a leaf Brix of 1.5 or 3.
Yeah.
Right. So it depends from the very beginning what the overall system function is.
but it's possible.
It's entirely possible at the first true leaf stage to have a high Brix reading, entirely. And generally, yeah, you should be able to keep going through whatever environmental conditions until frost.
Mhm.
Like when it gets down to 35 degrees, tomatoes don't really have, they don't like it. So that's the end of the season. But if you were able to get there and maintain it for multiple months, your productivity has been ridiculous. So the target is 12. Most people are going to find their plant leaf Brix is at like 3 or 4. So, you're normal. This is the first important step. One of the first important steps is humility. Like, I'm a good farmer. I'm a local farmer. I'm an organic farmer. I'm a regenerative farmer. My leaf Brix is 3. I'm doing a shitty job, whatever I identify as. Right? That's the actual empirical answer, is that your plants, while they may be somewhat green, are not totally vibrant and vital. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay with understanding that from a foundational standpoint, the level of vitality in your plants is low, that means awesome opportunity for improvement, right? Like if you're at 4 this year, you get to be 6 next year and 8 the year after that, like 12, who cares? Because the level of vitality that's occurring because you're at 8 is so impressive, you've never seen it before. I don't usually do either of these things. I'm giving you this is a good techniques, these are things you can do. At some point, ideally, you get to the point where you can just look and see. And I remember a couple of years ago, I had this guy who was living in the cabin I tell you about, and it was getting his $400 a week and learning all this stuff. And he's like, he actually came with me when I was teaching one of these courses, and I was talking about the refractometer. He's like, Danny, we should go Brix the crops. And I'm like, this is you don't want to be embarrassed, right? It was I think it was middle of October, and we went out to the hoop house to look at the salad greens, and they were all between 11 and 13. I was like, I hadn't got the refractometer out in years, and I hadn't tested anything, and I didn't know, but it was.
Yeah, but you did know.
I had plenty of fear that we were going to find 5. That I'm like, he's like, oh, you know all this shit. Then actually, your plants are sick. But if you do the right things, it's totally possible. And people talk about forages that are 18 or 20, right? It's not. You can get above 12, but So refractometers are a great way of getting you a number for how healthy your plants are. So that 12 Brix is the leaf of the plant that's growing. It's not the carrot or the potato. There's a whole Brix chart for the food, the part that you eat. This is for the leaf when the plant is growing.
They fluctuate during the day, right? The Brix.
It should go up and down a point or 2, but 12 is your baseline. 12 to 14.
In the morning at 12 and then go up to 14.
If you're 10 to 12, either way. If you're anywhere close to 12, good on you. Because most farmers are nowhere close to 12. Right? This is a target. We're talking about targets. We're talking about conceptually, here's a range to be aiming for. The reality is get out there and experiment and try it out. All right.
On the Brix,
Yes.
how do you get enough juice out of the basket?
Um,
Grow wheat.
So what we have, so I'll just say, and I don't want to be a marketing person, but you know, I do run an educational organization, and we do have these things that are membership benefits, and one of them is you can buy a refractometer, you know, kit. You can buy a conductivity kit. You can buy the garden kit. You can access the mineral depots. But what we have, along with refractometer, is we call a bricks press, which is a vice grips with 2 pieces of metal welded onto it, onto the teeth. So it gets you.
It's a game, it's easy.
Garlic press.
Well, a garlic press you can use too, sure, but you
This
gotta.
might break a few.
But this guy doesn't break.
This thing is
This
easy
thing
because
is-
you just, it just plants.
It's
and
a- it's
then
a- it's
you
a
tilt
vice
it,
grip,
and
you dial
just comes out.
And you might have to get multiple leaves too. I mean, it's-
Get enough leaves in there. If there's not enough moisture in the leaf to get a drop of juice out, then water is a limiting factor. But you already knew that. Yeah, so, I mean, there are instruments that are good, that can be used.
And the other thing is like, this late in the or you know, even if it's, well, yeah, even if it's still green, but it's later in the season, you're not gonna get enough juice out of it.
It's not, I've tried blending them and then squeezing.
Yep.
It's still, and then the drop is green, and so it's like I'm having trouble reading the real.
The darker the color, the better. If you get, I mean, so I've got the whole series of comments I give when I'm talking about bricks, but I mean, you don't even need a refractometer. If you can get the drop of juice on your thumb, like I want it to be sticky, so like it's mucilaginous. I want to be able to pull my forefinger up off of it, and it's like it's stringy. I don't want watery. I don't want thin and watery. I want sticky. So if it's dark colored and sticky, you don't need a beater. If it's light colored and watery, it's not good, right? We can get a number for people that need numbers, and you can be an animal and just feel it and look at it if you want also. I'm thinking we're close to 10 o'clock. Is that true? All right. What time is it exactly? Can we reconvene at 10:15? Take a break, stretch, pee? I feel like.